Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. I know a lot of you have been asking questions about the plane testing process. How is it coming? Do we have any results? And this is becoming much bigger than I was expecting, so I thought I would give you a video showing some of the questions that have been coming up and some of the changes that have been happening. So let's actually dive in, take a look at the plane hardness test. So first off, I'm not going to actually talk about any results just yet. If you are a patron on Patreon or a member on both of the channels, you will be getting a notification probably later today with the first set of results. We're about a fifth of the way through on the actual testing and what I will have up. So if you're interested in that, patrons and members will be seeing that, but we won't be talking about results today. Now, before I get into this video too much, if you really want to see a lot of the specifics about exactly how this is being done, I have a whole nother video about that. Plus I did a live video where I went through this whole thing and you can see a whole progression of it. So this is more or less an update on what I'm changing. So if there's anything new or something you're like, oh, you didn't think about that, then let me know. Initially, I was just going to be testing 8 or so of the most common types: Veritas, hawk iron, a Stanley, Reise, a few of those that everyone knows and wants. But the more I got into it, the more people are saying, oh, you really got to test this one. Ooh, you really got to test that one. Oh, you got to really test this one. And there's been several new makers who have come on the market this last year. So we now are up to 21 different makers that we're going to be testing. Stanley Sweetheart, a Sheffield, England Steel, Lee Nielsen, Wood River, DMF Tools, cheapo that's called Calistro, Bench Dog, Tay Tools, IBC, the Hawk High Carbon, the Hawk A2 Cryo, Union, Veritas PMV11, Veritas 01, Veritas A2, Harbor Freight, yeah, the cheapo Harbor Freight, Clifton. We're doing a Japanese. I actually found one that is a bilayer Japanese iron, but it's designed to work with regular planes, as well as Ray Isles, and then a new one, Kimush and Tools. He has one that has O2 and A2. We're going to be trying out both of those. So this should be quite the list of planes. If you want to see anything specific on this, I'll leave a link to all of them down below in the description so you can check them all out. So the first change up, originally I was going to be doing it with lignum vitae, with the world's hardest wood, and this would be a great test. You know, if it can do it in this, it will dull it quicker, it'll be a great one to work with. But I realized that if I'm doing 21 tools and 3 full tests on every iron, I'm gonna need 20 plus feet of lignum vitae, and that is very expensive. It actually ends up coming up to almost a board foot per iron is turned into curls. So yeah, we're not doing it with lignum vitae because I don't have the several $1,000s to buy that. Instead, I decided to use hickory. It is commonly available, it is easy to get, but it is a very hard wood. This is incredibly difficult on plane irons because it has a high silica content. It's a very dense wood, it's very stringy, and it is a very good substitute. Basically, for the average woodworker, this is pretty much the hardest thing you're going to put your plane iron through. So why am I doing all of these new irons and I'm not testing any of the good old standbys? Or why am I not testing multiple different Stanleys over the years? And the reason being is that I want to test replacement irons. You know, if you want the old irons, you probably already have them because you bought the plane and now you're looking at, do I replace them? And so that's why I'm just testing plane irons. I am testing one Stanley Sweetheart and one Sheffield Steel because those are kind of looked at as like the gold standard of antique irons. Now, that being said, the other big reason why I'm not testing a lot of other old ones is that there used to be a very large variance from batch to batch. So if you say, you know, like the Type 14 Stanleys, from batch to batch, even through the course of the year, you're going to have wildly different types. And so I'd have to be testing literally thousands to even get an idea of what they might have averaged. Most of the newer plane irons are heat treated with a computer and you can get a far more accurate measurement on every one of them. So batch to batch, these tend to be far more standardized than they used to be. Maybe sometime in the future I'll do some more older irons, but so for this we're just going to be doing replacement irons with the basic control of a Stanley Sweetheart and an old Sheffield. So why exactly am I sharpening them at 35 degrees? I had quite a few questions about that. And 35 degrees for a bevel down high angle plane is a great bevel to have. It is a very durable angle. It will last longer than a lower angle. And when you're going bevel down with a high angle plane, it doesn't matter if it's at 20, 25, 30, it's still going to be cutting the same. It's just the higher the angle, the more durable the plane will be. So 35 degrees is what I have all of my planes at. I do know some people who will sharpen at 40 degrees, but that starts to get into the diving problem. So I'm sharpening them at 35. I may end up doing one series of tests with one planes and showing the durability difference from 20, 25, 30, 35, and 40, but we'll see how that goes. One of the interesting things I'm seeing so far is as I'm planing it, the first time I test it, it's just about as sharp as it can be. And it's interesting to see that some of these blades I can get much sharper than others. And so that's going to be one of the data points, is how sharp can you actually get the plane? Because some steels you can get incredibly keen, and some of them, no matter what you do, you're just not going to get them as incredibly sharp. But the interesting thing I'm seeing is that, after 20, 30 strokes, most of them are right about the same so far. Now, I haven't tested a lot of the cheap ones yet, and I haven't tested a lot of the higher end ones, but what we're seeing is that they get dull very, very quickly right off the bat, and then there is a very gradual dulling until they kind of plateau out at just dull. And I'm interested to see how do those waveforms compare to each other, and do some planes get duller slower, or do some planes stay sharper longer and then get dull quickly? These are the questions that I really don't know, and we won't know until we actually test them. So there's going to be a lot of weird little bits of data in that will be very interesting to see. Most all of these planes will be tested in my Stanley number 4 because they're all shaped for a 4 or 5. So I'll be using this for the average plane. However, some of them I wasn't able to get in a 4 because they were out of stock, and for that I'm actually using my Stanley 5 1/4. I'm not using my 3 because it isn't quite as level, so my 4 1/4 is the best plane for that. So there will be slight inconsistencies in that it's a slightly longer plane, but for the 5 or 6 irons that I'm using that are of a size 3 or 4 1/4, yeah, I really don't think the longer sole is going to make that big a difference. It might actually give it a little bit more standard thickness, but oh well. Also, the Harbor Freight is a Harbor Freight 33, and so I had to use that because I can't put it in a number 4. But yeah, I tested this one yesterday, and I'll give you some heads up. It's trash. Also, the Union that I have, it's designed for a Union plane. It can be used in an old Stanley, but since I had a Union plane on hand, I decided to actually go ahead and use it in the Union plane. So it's kind of more of an apples to apples. It's designed for this plane, so you might get a little bit better response from it. So the Union iron is in the Union plane. But then with all that being said, there are actually a few irons that are too thick for my number 4. The yoke doesn't stick through far enough, and particularly on the Clifton and a few of these that are incredibly thick irons, I can't use my number 4 because it won't stick through, and so for those I'm having to use my number 5. So yeah, there is some variance in between planes. I'm trying to make sure that my cut is close and even all the way across so that there isn't much variance in between those. But my number 5 has a little bit longer yoke, so it can stick through and grab from these incredibly thick irons. Another question that I was getting quite commonly is, how do I know that my plane shavings are all the same thickness? And my original thought was that I was going to go through and measure the first couple in every series and make sure they're all about 0.005, which is the thickness I'm shooting for. What I found was that was taking way too much time, and it wasn't as accurate as I want because thickness can also vary on pressure and how you're diving into the wood. So what I found is I am going to be measuring a few of them, making sure that they're 0.005, but most of the time I can pretty closely eyeball that and get a really good response on that. So for guarantee of what I'm doing, I'm actually going to be measuring the full thickness of the board before I do a whole series of cuts. I'll write that down. And then after the full series of the board, I'm going to measure it again. And usually that's about 1.5-ish that I'll be losing over the course of the run. So every run is about 1.5 of 2 feet of board. Yeah, and then I have to do 3 runs with every iron. 400 strokes. So for this whole test, I'm going to be doing over 25,000 shavings. we're having a bit of fun here, and this is taking a lot longer than I expected. Originally, I was planning on doing one test for 6, 7 irons, and it grew and grew and grew, and the more accurate I want the data and the clearer I want it, it becomes a bigger and bigger test. So that's why this is taking so much longer. I'm really hoping I can have this done around mid-November. So all told for this test, it's going to be just shy of about 400 hours to make this whole thing work. It's not just the planing time, but the cataloging, the testing, the sharpenability, the writing it all down on the computer, the creating the graphs. It's an immense amount of work, but one I'm really looking forward to because I love spreadsheets. The other thing that I'm really looking at doing is taking these and getting them actual hardness tested, which will be a lot easier than these than for the chisel. So I will probably be doing that. It would be kind of interesting to see the scientific Jenka hardness on them, but that is, yeah, we'll see. I haven't completely decided, so if that's something you really want to know, let me know in the comments below. So there you go. This is turning into a much bigger monster than I was anticipating. Wow, this is going to be a great spreadsheet with a lot of fun numbers. And speaking of which, if you want to see the up-to-date information on that, you become a patron or become... Speaking of which, if you want to see early entries and all of the data as it comes out, I am going to be putting those up on Patreon, as well as members will get a notification of that as well. So if you want to see that, click the join button or become a patron down below. I do want to say a huge thank you to the patrons on Patreon. I have spent a crazy amount of money on this, buying irons, buying lumber, and things like that I'm just turning into curls. And most of these irons are ones that I'm never going to use. I may end up giving them away or something like that afterwards. And really the only reason I could do that is because of patrons on Patreon. So thank you to everyone for that. So I think that's about it. If you do have any questions, concerns, ideas, things I could do better, let me know those down in the comments below. I do read through all of them, and I've gotten a lot of the ideas and slight changes from that. So thank you for everyone who's been giving your comments on that. So on that note, until next time, have a wonderful day. This is plain iron, and this is boring iron.